first thing is,
Sure,
can you
no
just
problem.
set the platform as to who you are, how you're involved in sports, and what are your expertise behind sport?
Yeah, sure. So I've been a sports administrator, I suppose, entrepreneur for 25 plus years, primarily cutting my teeth in the coaching space, coaching primarily rugby and cricket, progressing through various stages of that. Probably the highest levels, I coached JP Boys first team, and I coached the Wits University seconds and first team, and then progressed into professional sports administration and really started getting involved on executive level in the school space, and just really grew from there around creating sportisms, both participation and for competitive sport. I will refrain from using the word high performance and school sport in the one sentence because I'm not a fan of those two components in the one sentence. But yeah, certainly we would look to create spaces where people could perform at their maximum. In terms of where I am right now, I work for Football Victoria, which is the state soccer federation in Melbourne, Victoria. We are a federated member of Football Federation Australia, who are the FIFA member for the Oceanic region, or for the Asia region in terms of FIFA. And my primary role at the moment is, it's called Club Ambassador, but effectively we're a club development manager, and I have roughly about 100 clubs that I deal with in the community and the elite space. And I also deal with roughly 17 metropolitan councils who would be in charge of, I suppose, running facilities and operating facilities. So my interaction, I also coach, I'm the head coach of the local Maccabi Cricket Club here in Victoria. So that's really revitalized my energies around coaching. On a day-to-day basis, I'm dealing with those types of situations that, you know, I'm in a cross spectrum of sport, from an operational to strategic level, and then obviously down all the way to the ground level of coaching, performance management systems, grading systems, policies, ethics. I've had the privilege of sitting on a national working group for Football Federation Australia to create what we call the National Club Development Program, which is an online organizational health measurement program, which is a star-rated program, and I was very privileged from Victoria to be on that working group with the other member federations across Australia for football. So that's, I hope, is a kind of a picture of where I am in terms of sport.
Sure, that's a lot. Now, specifically, you've started a YouTube channel talking about various aspects within sport and sport in general and stuff. Now, where it starts off from is that prior to the coronavirus and the old ways of doing things, you have picked up certain kind of issues or ways that you feel need to be changed and don't really work. Like we already mentioned, the competitive side didn't really work out in your opinion. Like I know with our discussions with Theo Garin, his thing is that like schools an education institution, and school sport should be always driven around education still, as you know, as the primary goal of the school, but it's not. It's a very competitive thing. So what were the problems or some of the issues that you've picked up in the past of school sport, and how do you think they'll change in the future?
Yeah, look, I think pseudo-professionalism invading the sporting system in school is the absolute main factor. And schools identifying sport as a singular marketing platform to get kids to come to their schools. And so from that sort of sprouts the idea of offering bursaries and poaching of players. And I certainly don't have to tell you the amount of stories that have gone on with regards to that. And you can see that the general outcome has not been good, where schools are not keen to play each other, where schools are withdrawing from participating against each other. But I'm totally on the same page as Theo, in the respect that I never would use high performance and school sport in the one sentence, because I don't believe that high performance has any place in a school sporting environment. I would never refer to school sport as just sport. It was always school sport, and the fundamental word there is school. So I would focus on a phrase that I used to use, which was edu performance instead of high performance, which lent itself to the concept of education. Sport remains a medium whereby we can extend the learning outside of the classroom onto the field. And I would often have conversations with academic staff that their 4 lines was their classroom, and I used to point to the sports field and go, those are my 4 lines, and that's my classroom. What are you doing in your classroom, and how can I help you to get more out of our students in that environment? And I think, yeah, Sean, in essence, I would say that money and pseudo professionalism is something that schools have taken on board. I think it does rest largely with principals. I think principals and heads of schools, would have to have taken a much firmer stance on where their school holds in the sporting framework. I remember my last school that I worked for, which I was privileged to work for, and I'm not going to mention their name just because I don't know if that's allowed, but it wasn't a monastic school. It wasn't an all-boys school. And all the children that I was dealing with were saying, oh, we want to be like that school, one of the bigger monastic schools in Johannesburg. And I kept saying to them, you're not even the best that you can be in this school. Why do you want to be like them? Let's work this in process. Let's increase our abilities across skill sets and techniques, and let's become better at what we do. Let's be the best version of ourselves before we start worrying about being somebody else. And I think also, Sean, it was important to make sure that your coaching structure was educationally sound. That we weren't, I never chased big names. I never chased the Paul Anthonys. Probably the biggest name I chased and secured for a very short period of time was Andy Royale, who finished some time at Wits and then moved over to St Andrews in Grahamstown, I think. And that was about the extent of the strategic importance we placed on sport. What I did work really hard on was securing coaches for a longer period of time so that I could work with those coaches, because I believe that if we got our coaches educationally sound, we would have educationally sound sports environments. And we created a very strong coexistence between performing and being the best sport people we could be, whilst remaining absolutely dedicated to the fact that we were a school and our first and foremost priority was to be academically sound and to be attaining academic goals and to being the best academic individuals we could be, and move that into then being the best people we can be. Sport was that lesson. Sport was an outlet for a lot of players, for a lot of kids. It was a place where we wanted kids to feel welcome, safe, that they could express themselves. If they weren't necessarily 75% aggregate students, they were potentially first team hockey players, or the relay swimmer, or the best runner, or cross country contributor. That was what sport was about. It's strategically, from my sport, I wanted sport to become part of the decision making of a parent choosing the school, not the sole decision maker. And I think that is where some of our questionable schools hold, is that sport is the deciding factor. And I can give you stories aplenty of where bursaries fail dismally, for very obvious reasons, because there's just no cultural buy-in. It's a transaction, a commodity-based transaction, which drives no loyalty, no sense of belonging, no cultural synergy, and so it just fails. Yeah, I'm very much against it, and I would say that I'm very proud of the position I held. It was never going to change. In fact, I probably would have, if I'd stayed in South Africa, I probably would have dug my heels in further and probably got myself into even more bad books around being totally anti bursaries, anti high performance in a school environment.
Yeah, so the first thing is, so on the high performance side, now as you know, I work in quite a bit of mini cricket, and I get a lot of bounce back from schools saying, no, the kids shouldn't be playing mini cricket, they should be coached by professional coaches already at the age of 5, 6 years old, because they're going to become a future pro to player, which is normally the parent actually living their own childhoods again, not actually the kids' benefits. And for me, like something like mini cricket, which is fantastic, where it's mass participation, everybody gets to bat the same, bowl the same, field the same. You've got also kids with different kinds of abilities playing, not just different skills, but actually different abilities coming in and playing. And for me, it's something like that, especially for the primary school level, is so important to just get kids involved. Also because, I mean, with our mini cricket program, there's 128,000 kids that took part last season. Now, of those kids, maybe 5 of them, 10 of them will become international players. The rest of them are going to become fans. The guys are going to be filling the seats. If they fall in love with the sport, then they'll fill the seats. They'll watch the games. They'll become the next fans, and that continues the whole commercial side of cricket. But if I find that if you start playing at a high performance at such a young age, and we're not even hitting high school yet, the kids lose interest and they drop out of those sports. And I've got lots of friends that say they hate cricket because they couldn't bat, they couldn't bowl, and they just didn't participate, they just fielded. So a lot of life lessons are actually lost by, or future fans are lost by the fact that guys are trying to push that. But now, how do you stop like a parent trying to muscle in and take over the coaching and get very high level of coaching at such a young age?
Yeah, look, I think, early specialization, there's lots of literature around it, but at the highest levels, I remember reading something out of the Barcelona Football Academy, which was vehemently against early specialization and really encouraged and showed some very key studies that kids that were exposed to multiple codes over their formative years, so let's say ages 6 to 13, even up to the age of 15, kids that were exposed to multiple codes showed a far greater transfer rate into professional sport than the opposite. So kids that specialize too early are the kids that fall out and are lost to the game. Never mind fall out and become fans, of fall out and really hate the game and never come to any area. I think to get to your question though specifically, I think in the schooling environment, you can only do what you can do in your environment. And I think proactively, you've got to be ahead of the game to make sure that your policies and your communication is very clear, and that you're very, very clear on your strategy and what that means and what the implementation of that strategy looks like. You have to be clear on that to every stakeholder. You have to massage that communication, and that's your game, not mine. You're very good at that one, and you have to make sure that the transfer of the message is very clear to the parent, to the coach, and to the kid of exactly what this means, and that this is not a high performance environment. I suppose the one example I can give you, we would obviously very, very regularly, particularly in the sports of rugby union, soccer, particularly in those codes, but still the impact of the clash between school sport and club sport. And my general rule of thumb was that there had to be win-win in every conversation. One party could not lose, because that places the kid in a very dubious position. So obviously I would have kids come to me and say, well, I've got to leave soccer early at 4 o'clock because I've got training at 4:15. And I'd say to them, but how come the school sport has to lose, but your club gets 100% of you? Why can't I get 50% of you and the club gets 50% of you? And so I instituted a ruling that you were allowed to leave sport 15 minutes early and get to your club engagement 15 minutes late. And I had many conversations with club coaches to say, this is the policy of the school. And if the child does leave earlier than that, they won't be considered for selection. That was pretty harsh and pretty direct, but it was clear, and it was the same rule for everybody. But I will say that as a practitioner, as I would, you know, classify myself as a practitioner in that space, I did have a lot of parents come to me and ask me the question, should we do this? Should we do that? Can we do this? And that's your opportunity to put your 5 cents into the conversation and really dispel theories around that. I would send out regular communications via newsletters, via social media of, you know, of how important participation and recreation is in the game, and how we all have to be multi-code players. I had about 35% of my kids, we had about a 67% participation rate in sport. We had unique participation of about 35%. So the difference was kids wanting to play one sport a year, and that was not something we were keen on. We wanted role modeling. We wanted ripple effects from excellence to spread to other codes. And just because you were a first team rugby player doesn't mean you have to be, you know, in the A-team relay athletics, but you needed to be part of the athletics team because it was about role modeling, and it was about being an action hero, which is the phrase we kind of used often, was being an action hero. So can you enforce, can you, you know, you'll know that you get that type of parent where you go and make a suggestion and you get absolutely lambasted for it. How dare you interfere? Nothing to do with you. That's fine, you know. But should you ever want some advice, please take heed of what I've said. And, you know, I'm always available to you. You'd always leave yourself available to those parents. I think it's very hard though, Sean, if the question hasn't been asked. I think it's very difficult for a practitioner like myself, like yourself, like Theo, to kind of enforce your opinion. You can do so. I had the opportunity of writing for Theo's publication, and that was a big medium for me to really get my messages across. And I took a couple of hits for that. I'd be called in fairly often to say, you know, you've got to be careful how you write those things, because certain board members are taking exception to some of that stuff. And I kind of would say, well, if the shoe fits, then wear it. You know, if that's hitting a sore point for you, well, then maybe the issue is with you and not so much with me.
Where I found actually quite amazing was with some of the professional sportsmen, ex-professional sportsmen, when they eventually have their kids and send their kids to school, some of them are actually some of the better parents, because they've reached the highest level and they know what it takes to reach the highest level, and they allow the coaches to do their own thing. And in allowing coaches and actually empowering the coach, firstly, it allows the coach to coach at a higher level better, that the coach is not second guessing himself or herself. And the second thing is that eventually the coach will actually turn to that player and say, listen, you've had this experience before. How did you get past it? Can you help me out with this issue with this kid and that kid? And the parent becomes, being an ex-player becomes more active and proactive in helping the coach at the end of the day. And I found that, surprisingly enough, actually fantastic from ex-players. And eventually you see some of the other, the parents that are more vocal about their kid will sit back and say, well, if he's doing it this way, then why shouldn't we be doing it that way? And it actually becomes quite a nice thing. But it's amazing how a professional player can do that, but then a person that's never made that level has got their own opinions and knows better than the coach. Yeah,
you said it earlier on. I think the vicarious nature of one's self-esteem plays itself out very evidently. I think that that former international, that former professional sports parent has done it. Doesn't need to live his or her life through their child. Whereas the almosts, which I call them, the almost or the almost possibles, who would feel, well, I was almost there. I played Craven Week, but I didn't really get a professional contract, or that they kind of feel that they can achieve their own goals through their kids, and it's those parents that become problematic. Whereas I think the appreciation of how difficult sport is. I certainly, my two older kids both play sport now. And I say this, I don't say this lightly. I had the misfortune of actually being the coach manager for my son's cricket side. Why do I say the misfortune? Is because I am my kid's father. I'm not my kid's coach. And that's a very different relationship, a very different process that you have to follow. And my son is 9 years old. He doesn't understand when I have to be the coach, as opposed to, he just knows me as his father. That's all he wants from me. He doesn't want me to be his sports coach. He wants me to be his biggest fan 100% of the time. And so I've made it very clear to the organization that I won't coach my son's team again, because I know that he will get better without me there, and I will be able to be his father much more than I have been this year. My daughter, netball, I just remain the biggest fan, because again, I've been on the other side of the table, and I know how hard it is to make this happen, and I know how difficult these coaches are working through process and outcome, and I make it my absolute business to stay far away from the coaching bench, to be a parent, but I don't live my, I try my best to not live my life vicariously through my children. Let them have their own experiences, let them have their own failings, their own successes, be there just as a supportive parent. And I've written about this topic. This is probably one of the hottest topics for me, Sean, the parent and the role that they play. And I'm sure you've heard the phrase helicopter parent before, and we developed one called the lawnmower parent, where helicopter became the kind of parent and the lawnmower just steamed you and just absolutely rolled over you. So these are tough things. I have the privilege of calling Garth Nielsen from 4S High School a colleague, and he's magnificent, and I know the fights that he fights, and I know the outcomes that he gets. David Joshua, Stefan Chamastace, these guys are high quality educators, and Garth is really one of the few left, particularly in Johannesburg, and I know in KZN and Western Cape there's some really high quality guys. But this is a message that has to be transcended beyond interviews like ours, and it's got to go into the media. It's got to become a constant rhetoric message. It's got to be pushed on a mass level to reach the type of outcomes that we would want in that space. It's a very dangerous problem, and has as much power to stop kids from playing sport as the early specialization does. So it's a very, very key point that you raised, Sean.
I also think that, and I've noticed specifically in primary schools, that the primary school teams that do the best are the guys that actually have school teachers as their coaches, because the school teacher will see what's happening in the classroom, see what they can actually do to help the kid out, and then take that to the sporting field, which is should be a non-pressure environment, and actually take those lessons and together with friends, together with mates, actually teach them school lessons. And I think that even if you do get an external coach to come in, that coach must be able to understand the child, must have some kind of educational background, so that they can teach the teacher, like you were saying earlier on. You can go to the school teacher and say, okay, what's happening with this child? How can I help this child out? And then try and implement those lessons in the non-pressure environment and on the sports field.
I think the fine balance, I agree with you, by the way. Generally, most school teachers make the most successful coaches. Is enough evidence, the likes of Sir Graham Henry and Jake White being two prime examples. Even I think Eddie Jones might have been an educator, as far as I'm aware. I stand to be corrected on that one. There's really a lot of evidence for obviously the ability to teach and the ability to manage larger numbers in a classroom environment are very, very important. But there's another side to that, and the reality is that the expectations placed on school teachers are far greater than they were 10 years ago, definitely far greater than they were 20 years ago, and certainly when I was at school, definitely greater than then. And so you have this, unfortunately, you have the American type model where you develop a whole secondary stream of staff, which is your sporting staff, and then you have your teaching staff. But what we try to do was recognize the very lesson that you speak of, is that having an educator involved in the sporting space was vital. So we try to develop, we would have an outside coach pretty much for every single sport in the school, almost every single team, but they would be managed by a staff member, where the staff member couldn't be an actual coach, that they would bring the educational aspect, bring down any information out of the schooling environment. I made it my business as a director of sport to really be engaged with the teaching staff. They felt welcome to come to me discuss any problematic situations with children, that I could either then speak to the child separately and try and resolve privately, which we were able to do on many occasions. If not, certainly I would brief the team's coach and say, there is this problem, either be part of a solution or know that if we don't get it right, this child is not going to be able to play in your team. And so that wasn't a win-win for me. The win-win was to make sure that we got the kid right, we got the kid happy, that they were achieving in the group, that they're not conforming to the group dynamic, but there needed to be some level of conformity. We can't have everyone going rogue and running amok. That wasn't the solution either. So, you know, we needed to have some level of conformity. And the communication was the key, though. We had to have communication. Sometimes it broke down, and we had to do a bit of patchwork around that. But in general, I would track the detention roster, for instance. And if I saw sports kids on that detention roster, I would make sure that I went to that detention class, and I would have little words in those sports people's ears. And I'd be saying, you know, I expect you to be a role model. This is not where role models sit. Role models are out there in the field. And they would come, then I'd have, on the other side of that, I'd have kids come to me and expect concessions from detention or punishment because they were frontline sports kids. And I was like, no, that's not how it works, mate. You're going to go and serve your time, and you're going to come back, and you're probably going to miss selection because you didn't make training. And so you're going to have to explain to your team, and this is the lesson that you're going to have to pick up to make sure that you come back from this, and that you become a contributing member of the setup. So we worked really hard. Number one, I spoke to you earlier about developing coaches and making sure that we kept them for a minimum of 3 years, which allowed relationships to be built, not only between the school and the coach, but also between the kids and the coach. That there was the turnover of coaching staff had to be as low as possible. I think we got it down to about 1%, which was 1.5%, which is really, really important. And then engaging the teaching staff, who took a lot of coercing, I must tell you, to come down and to manage and to be engaged with their groups and their teams. And I'd say we probably got about 90% of our teams that had educational staff engaged with them, and the differences were clear, absolutely clear. So I suppose the message that I can give schools is, where possible, try and create some space for teachers to be involved in sport. I think generally most teachers would love to be part of sport, and try and see how you can create a support mechanism outside of the academic expectation, where other teaching teams can help out with each other, or where you can create a space for teachers to get out into the sporting field for 2.5 hours, twice a week, and perhaps on the weekend. And, you will definitely see a different teacher, because, they're getting a chance to express themselves. They're getting some activity time as well, running around and worrying about teams. But it's tough, Sean. I do sympathize and empathize with heads of schools in this space, but appoint the right director of sports, and let the director of sport, or your deputy head director of sport, whatever the case may be, try and endeavor to address that situation in an educational framework. There's no other framework. It's educational. It's not a sporting framework. It's an educational framework.
You see, getting the teachers involved, even if they're not actively going to be coaching and stuff, is quite important, I think. And also not giving concessions to the better sporting kids. Because I have noticed there is a bit of animosity between some of the teachers and some of the coaches, and because the teacher will try and instill certain kind of discipline in the school, and then the coach will say, but no, he's our first team rugby player or something. He doesn't have to go into detention, or he can do detention in a couple of weeks' time, when they actually won't learn from the mistakes, and they actually taught the wrong life lessons.
Yeah.
Because I find sport is actually, and I'm a bit of a preacher in this, is I say that this is an easy place to teach life lessons. Why would you play cricket and you play a long cricket game instead of a T20, and the kid learns that he says, okay, well, days is good days, days is bad days. You can start off the day, where a batsman cannot hardly hit a ball, but if he stays and he works at it, eventually works through it, and eventually he's hitting the ball perfectly. And those are kind of life lessons that you can learn, that you can apply to business, you can apply to anything within the working space or life in general. And there's no quick, quick kind of idea. You've got to work through it. and it's all through school sport.
I think one of the biggest things that I learned in my time growing through the ranks, I suppose, to getting to the top of executive sport in the school space was process, and the difference between process and outcome. And I think in today of the modern disposable society, where instant gratification is a demand and an expectation, the ability to slow everything down and say, whoa, there's a process here, follow the process, and the outcome will take care of itself. But if you're trying to get the outcome before you follow the process, generally you're going to fail. And in some cases you'll fail dismally. And then not only will you have to go back to square one, but your square one will actually be a lot lower than it was before. So the ability to teach coaches that, to teach myself that, to teach teaching staff that, and absolutely the life lessons that are there are fundamental. And if we lose out on those opportunities, then you might as well not have sport as part of your school environment, because then you've lost you've eradicated the platform. Sport is a complementary framework to the academic and educational space. It is not one or the other. They have to coexist. And so you have to make sure that your leadership and your executive leadership and your strategic thinkers are in that coexistence space, in no other space whatsoever.
And then, going to some of the things now. So we've spoken over general schools and then a lot of primary school stuff. But now the high school and now club side of things is where you actually started off your own YouTube channel talking about that. Now we've got it, and it's big here in South Africa, and I think it's all over the world, where you've got like a Harper in the UK where they've won the British Championship, English Championship 8 out of the last 10 years. You've got a great college that can't play any schools in its area. And if they do play, then they have a rule that if they get to, in rugby, if they get to more than 50 points in the opposition, they have to stop their games. And some games only last 12 minutes. So they have to travel the entire country because they've kind of cleaned up, I'm using names here, but they've cleaned up around the area, and people want to go to that school because they know that's a high performance rugby school. So if there are good players, they won't go to a school down the road, they'll go immediately to that school. Now you've spoken saying, okay, well, what the coronavirus has done is actually it's opened up the community element around sport, and saying, instead of being the best team and taking over the entire area, why don't we play each other? Why don't we work together as a province, the union, as a town even, to develop our sport and have more active and positive, sport in that area.
So I think two answers that I want to talk. The first one, the COVID issue, what I think it brings to us is that we've got to, one of the ways of suppressing the spread of the virus is to limit the amount of interaction and to limit the amount of distances that we're actually traveling. So have someone going from Bloemfontein to, Welkom, or, going down to Paarl or something. There's a lot that goes into that. Flying an aeroplane obviously now is very circumspect. So in terms of one of the things that I certainly see coming from COVID is that we're going to have to limit our distances that we travel to participate in sport, because traveling is not a good thing. It doesn't allow us to contact trace properly, doesn't allow us to control any outbreaks if we don't know where people are going. And we've seen primarily the spread of COVID is because people from its point of origination, 5 million of them, left and travailed. And so 5 million became 25 million, and it's the numbers are way beyond. So I think, speaking to your idea around managing local sport, there's no question, and this will kind of lead me to my second answer, which was, I knew that if we were going to have to give our kids the best opportunities possible at a high school or club level, we needed to develop 3 tiers of fixturing, 4 fixtures at the bottom tier against teams that you're going to beat, or that you should be pretty certain you're going to beat. The next tier of 4 fixtures would be 50-50 fixtures, games that you're going to have to work hard, but if you do what you should do, you'll win the game. And then 2 fixtures at the top, games that you're probably not going to win, games that are getting you ready for a process, getting you ready that in 3 years' time, I have, and that model worked for us. So I will name drop just so that people get a sense of what it meant. So we would speak to the likes of King Edward VII School, St. John's College, St. Stithians College, and we would ask them. I remember we started this process in 2013. In 2013, we were playing 2 teams down in those age groups. So whether it be soccer or not in soccer, we could play team on team, but rugby, cricket, we would ask for fixtures 2 teams down. So our A's would play their C's and our firsts would play their thirds, etc. By 2015, 2016, we were playing team on team and our juniors were winning.
Wow.
Because we'd allowed ourselves the opportunity to grow and we were teaching our younger kids to win. So what would happen was there'd be trailblazers. So in 2013, say the under 14s lost by 50 points, the under 15s lost by 30 points, the under 16s lost by 24 points, but scored 10. Each year that would come down and down. All of a sudden, one trailblazing team wins and everybody believes that they can win. 3 years later, your first team's winning those games because they've got used to winning in under 14, under 15. So the process of building that performance system is very, very important, but being local as well. I never looked much out of our radius of, maybe 50 at most, not even 50. I'd say the school furthest from us would probably be about 20 Ks, 25 Ks. And we'd look local. Now, I think the problem though, as well, though, Sean, is when you talk the likes of a Grey College or a Paul Boys, you're talking, on the one hand, we said very earlier that we've got to be able to address kids playing at the highest, at the best level of theirs, maximizing their skill set. It's very important also to do that because if you undertrain a kid that is operating at a higher level, I'm not talking about high performance and I'm not talking about professionalism. I'm talking about addressing a skill set. But if you under-address that, you're going to lose that kid to the game as much as you are to the kid who gets early specialization. So you have to find a model that addresses that. Now, if Graham was to play that I was at, 12 minutes would have been very long. It'd be 7 or 10 minutes and the game would have been done because the levels were just very different. And I understand the fact that Grey Bloom and those types of schools are seeking ways of addressing and giving their kids some stimulation in that space. You take a Grey Bloom, Paul's a different story because Paul can play Paul Gim, Paul Boys, Paul Rus, there's already 2 fixtures for each of them that there's a relative quality. Go a little bit down the drag and pick up some of the Cape Town schools and you're okay still in terms of addressing skill sets. But, if you're going to pick on Milnerton High School and ask them to play Bishops, I mean, that's not a beneficial scenario. The kid at Bishops who's playing at a higher level, not getting stimulated. The kid at Milnerton is getting smashed and he's saying, well, this is not for me either. Like, I'm not prepared to lose this cricket game by 10 wickets every weekend just because we need to be playing local sport. Very, very tough one. But again, then it's about saying to Milnerton first team, play the Bishops third team in cricket or whatever. Find a way that you can incorporate more local participation in sport. I just don't think it's going to be that possible for the likes of a Grey Bloom or a Paul or an Affis to really find local competition. You're talking about 1 or 2 games. These schools are playing upwards of, you'll correct me, upwards of 20, 23 fixtures in a season with festivals. They have to travel for that. And that's going to be a big problem post COVID-19 is, how are you're going to get on a Shoshaloza train, a rail and train up? So you can't. I mean, it's, social distancing is not going to allow for that. So it's a huge problem. And I must be honest, if I was the director of sport at Grey Bloom or Affis or Paul Boys, I'd be very concerned about how I'm going to be looking after addressing my kids' skill levels and how I'm going to be stimulating them going forward. Because I think for the next 18 months, this is a very, very serious reality for a lot of sporting codes, not only in South Africa, but across the world. I think it's a very, very serious problem. And we may land up losing 2 years of sports talent, of exposure to sporting programs. You know, Grey Bloom's got this memorandum of understanding, or this agreement with that French rugby, I think, is it Montpellier or whatever it was, I can't remember. You know, that's gone. You can that's gone. Like, you're not traveling to France, mate. You're not getting on a plane, and you're not leaving South Africa. You're not going to France because there just isn't any air travel going on at the moment. So those are very interesting points. I don't know. I'd actually be very, very interested to hear from those sports directors and how they intend to look after the welfare of their kids and try and give them the best opportunities they can with where things are right now. I think it's very difficult.
And then in the club space too, because you've got very similar kind of problems in the club space where certain clubs can't, well, here in South Africa, I think club sport is very much on the decline. But I'm not sure what it's like there in Australia, but club sports battle to keep going. And certain areas they dominate for, and especially in rugby, certain teams dominate, like Berea Rovers in Durban. They'll dominate for years after years after years of players. And because it's right next to the rugby stadium, the Sharks players will go and play for them instead of playing for another club. Now, the Sharks have been very good at that. What they've done is they've insisted that each club in that Premier tier has at least one, or I think it's two Sharks players that plays for them. So they've spread the guys out around all the different clubs and stuff, which has been nice to actually bring up and uplift the areas, and also gets fans to come through to watch the game because they know that there's going to be a Sharks player playing for them. Which is now suddenly a sponsor wants to sponsor that team because now there is going to be a Sharks player. There are going to be people in the stands. A local sponsor wants to be seen there and stuff. So they're doing a very good job down there, and you can see it by the Sharks team. They have their dips, but generally speaking, they're a decent side. I think if you look at the Crusaders, they're a community team. They might be seen as the big rugby side. It's probably the most successful rugby team in the world, but they very much interact very much with the community and very much involved with what they do there, from what I understand. So, you know, it's nice to see that in giving back in those two examples, they're getting so much benefit from it. How do you see this club space changing?
Yeah, I think fundamentally one of the biggest challenges that you have in South Africa right now is that the clubs have unfortunately invaded the school age group space. So they've now started offering under 18, under 16, under 15, under 13, sometimes all the way down, as we know, Billikies, barefoot rugby at the likes of Harlequins in Pretoria and certainly Berea and various other clubs in Durban will be offering the same. But I think that's where the problem has come. I think from a governing body perspective, we should have been a lot clearer across all codes to say, because South African school sport is so exceptionally strong, and it's a very unique model that is run in South Africa, and you'll understand, you would know that, but the likes of Australia, the UK, the United States, it doesn't have that model. It's not a school sporting model. It's a much more club-driven model, and I'll explain that a bit further now. But effectively, if South Africa could say no more age group sport at club level, but start to sort of use the club at the university space. So you transcend from sporting prowess at schools, you then can get picked up by a club or by a university, play at that level, and then go to province. That's fine. Get a provincial contract through that. That would be the best, one of the better processes you could put in place because of the South African sporting landscape and how powerful sport is at schools. It's not like that in Australia. Only the private schools have extracurricular sporting programs, which are functional parts of their school days, very similar to how they are in South Africa. The state schools, which are a high quality product across Australia, don't offer sport in the afternoons. My kids finish school at 3:30 every day. They start school at 9 a.m., but they finish school at 3:30. There's no after school sport at the school, but they'll then go to club sport. And so club becomes a functional component of operating age group sport. So if you want to play age group sport at a community level, you go to a community sporting club: netball, hockey, soccer, cricket, rugby union, AFL footy, you would go to a club. You don't participate as you do in South Africa. It does not happen here in Australia. So I think I prefer the South African model, and I'm not sure if I prefer it because that's what I'm used to or because it actually makes sense. But I would much prefer my kids to stay at school till 5:30, knowing that they finish the academic day at 3:30 and they've done then, 2 hours of soccer or whatever at school. But that wouldn't work here because the reverse is true of here in the United Kingdom, is that clubs fill that space. So in terms of addressing, you described the Sharks and their model. It's up to bodies like the one that I work for, Football Victoria, which is the soccer federation body. It's up to us to drive, that community growth, that community sustainability, those models that all the catchphrases around making that work. It's about making all of those work. Now, unfortunately, I think we miss out on a lot of good sportsmen because no one really knows the systems and the procedures. So where you would hope someone would land up at a representative level, you actually don't know how to get there because no one really tells you, because it's not communicated on mass. So I think we lose out. I would say we're losing 25 to 30% of good sportsmen just because no one really knows where to go. But within the club sporting environment, we have a community environment, and then we'd have an elite space. So pretty much every code would run some. Yeah, so the club system has a community model, which would be your recreational participation model. And then most codes have a premier or an elite type structure that's operated on a national basis by the national bodies. But I still believe that most of our national sporting talent in Australia is from private schools. So it's a very elitist system. I haven't done the stats. I've asked the questions, but I haven't done the stats. I would imagine that pretty much all of the Australian cricket team right now has probably come through an elitist school model. I'm not so sure about Marnus at the moment. I think Marnus may have done state schooling. But yeah, you've got to really work hard to understand where you can get to representative sport, because as I say, it's not in the school systems. You would get it through your school, and you would know exactly when trials are, and you'd go and play your area trials, and etc. So I think it's something that I'm not used to. So I'm not going to say that it doesn't work, but it's very polar opposites in terms of how it's run in South Africa to how it's run here.
In Italy, we also had to play the club system because also the schools don't have sporting fields. So kind of compressing the school and stuff. So you had to actually go out and try and find other ways of playing sport. And as I said, if you didn't know where to go to, it's very difficult to find a place.
Yeah.
But still, they can still produce good sporting people and stuff. I think, yeah.
You raise a great point there, Sean. Sorry, you raise an excellent point in terms of facilities and the amount of facilities. South African schools are exceptionally unique and exceptionally blessed at the amount of sports facilities they have versus some of the schools that I've seen here. Certainly the private schools have that space, but the state schools definitely are very lacking in space. So you make an excellent point there.
I think we can actually continue for hours and hours here. So, I mean, you've got your own sporting channel on YouTube that guys can follow you on. So what is your sporting channel called? And I'll also put it in the description down at the bottom of mine. And then, people can actually, we just touched the surface of a whole lot of different activities here, but you'll actually break them down and go into more details. What's the purpose behind your sports channel?
Yeah, the purpose is really to probably, I've really missed being part of writing for Theo Garen's publication. And I think, as I said to you, the benefit of doing that was the ability to be able to transcend messages way beyond the normal means. And I think with the COVID time, I thought, I have so much content that I've worked on over many years that I wanted to kind of bring that content back to life. And that's really what I've done. And I just thought, I've got the opportunity now to really go and speak about those strategic and operational sort of sporting ideas. And if the only thing it achieves is provokes a bit of conversation and provokes a bit of thought, then I'm happy. That's really all I've ever wanted to do around those messages, is just to provoke. So really, and I suppose the name of it is pretty, quite key. The edge of sport being basically taking topics to kind of their reality, because if we were going to have Yuri Roo on our channel, we'd be hearing a lot of diplomatic platitudes and a lot of wonderful statements and catchphrases, but ultimately we wouldn't land up with much. And I think the ability of my channel is that I'm going to say it how I see it. Doesn't mean it's right, but to try and bring home that hard-hitting opinion and try and say some of the stuff that some of the executives can't really touch on. So Edge of Sport, Greg H, is where it's at, and the Sporting Edge with Greg H is the YouTube channel, and I've tried to put it out there on social media as much as I can, and try and get some conversations going, really, because none of the stuff, Sean, that I'm putting out is, I don't profess that it's the gospel, and I don't profess that it's the only way to do things, but I do make it clear that it's my opinion and that I'm open to other, being convinced otherwise. But I'm hoping that it helps people. I'm hoping that it makes a difference and gets people to think differently about certain things. But I would welcome, that feedback that maybe changes my thinking and maybe gets me thinking differently about certain things, that I welcome as well. And I've always welcomed that. Where I was on radio running the school sports buzz on radio when I was in South Africa, writing in the newspaper, I would often get some feedback, but hopefully through the social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, the YouTube channel, I'm really hoping that we can just try and spread the love a little bit and get the word out there and start getting people to think about different things. So we're going to touch on hard-hitting topics. My second episode was about women in sport and how I really just don't feel like we've been successful in making this a reality for women across all areas of sport across the world. So that was the second episode, and I'm actually going to be talking to Sharman Naidu, who's part of the sports staff at Wits University and a former sports director at Westfield Boys High in the KZN, because there's a guy that I think really is at the coalface, and his opinions are valued, and I think he's a real forward thinker of the game. The likes of Garth Nielsen, also very valuable to talk to. But yeah, in general, I can't tell you what episode 3 is going to be about yet, because I haven't actually decided, but there's enough content to keep me going. I was blessed to write for Theo for 5 and a bit years, so I've got a bit of content going, and I'm sure COVID, that was a new story for me, but mixing with the likes of yourself and following your social media channels as well gets me thinking and sparks ideas. And as I say, if that can help people, that's all I'm about, is just trying to make other people the best versions of themselves, because if I make someone else the best version of themselves, hopefully I'm making myself the best version of myself.
Yeah, I actually haven't just watched your second clip, and I need to watch that now, because I've got very big opinions on women's sport, and I think it's an untapped market, especially for marketers and sponsors. And I think the quality of women's sport is incredible at the moment. When we look at the Women's Football World Cup, I loved it. I watched every second of it. It was amazing. But,
yep.
I mean, look at the quality of women's cricket. I mean, Australia is so much further ahead of everybody else because they've got a proper sponsorship system. They've got a proper, system in place to actually develop the talent and stuff. But other countries are playing very quick catch up at the moment. So
I'd be interested on your feedback on it. It really focuses on the title of it is differentiation is not the equation. So I'm looking for a one product, one approach. We often in the community game that I'm in, I'll often hear people say, well, our men's program doesn't run like that. Why should our women's? And I keep saying, well, why are you trying to build a women's program and comparing it to the men? Just build the women's program the same you built the men's program. Very simple. Stop comparing. So I'll be very interested to get your feedback on it, because it's a pretty, I'm very passionate about it, and I think we're failing, and I think we're failing women. Kate Palmer, who was the CEO of Sporting Australia, which is our national sporting body. It used to be called the Australian Institute of Sport, which a lot of South Africans are au fait with. She resigned recently amidst rumors of general institutionalized bullying, I suppose, from the male fraternity. Raylene Castle, the former CEO now of Rugby Australia, undoubtedly was bullied by the boys club and a bunch of Wallaby captains that have been relatively silent since their tenure as a Wallaby captain, and all of a sudden think that they've got the answers to the game, have pretty much pushed her out of her role. And I'm not a fan of hers, by the way, but I still believe that she was crucial as a role model to other women out there and other women climbing the corporate ladder. She was a vital role model, and we've done nothing to change the landscape by just bullying her out of her position. So those are kind of the themes of that conversation. So I'll be very interested to get your feedback, Sean, and certainly keen to hear your opinions on it.
Cool, perfect. Well, thank you so much, Greg. This is fascinating. This has been actually a lot of fun this morning.